All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Maybe not that that angle's like much better, but so for the exam review packets, we are finishing those up. So hopefully I will have that for you guys tomorrow, like when I send my like weekly email. So what else was I saying? Sort of other classes. Your exam is going to be on the 17th. So we have chapter 22, and then we'll have Thursday for review. Chapter 22 is a pretty short chapter, so we might have time on Monday for review as well. I've been trying to do like review more throughout the semester, or not the semester, throughout the like lessons where like we do more in-class activities. So hopefully that'll prepare us better. But exam will be on the 17th. For your final exam review packets, I'm hoping to have those to you guys like before Thanksgiving so that you guys can get started on that like super early. Yeah. So that's all the updates I have for you guys. We're going to do the digestive tract today. In all my other classes, we just got through the lecture and that's it. So I suspect that's probably what we'll end up doing today as well. Shanta.
Hey, do you not receive my emails?
Let me check right now.
I sent you one on Monday and I never got a response.
Oh, okay. I just see it now. Sorry. It was marked as unread, so I guess I probably just missed it. Oh, because Mondays, like, I mean, since I'm teaching, sometimes I just like forget to open the emails on Monday. But
Okay.
I'll respond to you the next time we have a MCQ so that I'll update you, okay? So starting with the microbiome, I don't have this in your guys' packets because like we just kind of talk about it. We don't really like test on it. So basically, just like you have a microbiome on your skin, you also have one inside of your digestive tract. Okay. Um, it can contribute to a bunch of disorders like IBS, obesity, diabetes, allergies, whole bunch of stuff. And they're doing more research on it now. Brianna.
I'm sorry, that was an accident.
Okay, no worries. I just want to make sure you have a question. Okay, so a little throwback to chapter 11. We already talked about the enteric nervous system. So again, I didn't really include a spot in your packet for it. Doesn't mean it's not important because we did cover it in chapter 11. Okay. The enteric nervous system basically controls your digestive tract. Okay. It's your gut-brain axis, so it's going to contribute to controlling your digestive tract. It does communicate with your central nervous system. However, it's also able to operate independently. Now, getting to the digestive system itself, okay? Now, you have your digestive tract, aka your alimentary canal, which is going to be a tube that extends from your mouth to your anus, okay? It's going to include all of these structures that are written in blue here, which we're going to go more in depth for all of them. But basically, what it is it's one long tube. And each section of it has its own specializations that make it an individual organ. Okay. So, but the food is still going to pass all the way from mouth to anus, just along one tube. And you have like the out pockets of different organs. So your mouth, your pharynx, your esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, then anus. Okay. Then you are going to have these things called accessory organs. These are going to be organs that are outside of that tube that are going to aid in digestion. Okay. So a lot of the time they're going to secrete things like enzymes, which are just chemicals that are going to aid in digestion, or like mucus, stuff like that. Okay. Or they contribute to like processing or storing things. And we're going to talk about them in depth. So these are going to include things like your teeth, your tongue, your salivary glands, your liver, your pancreas, and your gallbladder. Now, there are two phases of digestion. Okay, you have mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion is going to involve physically breaking food down. So something like chewing. Okay, so beginning with chewing in the mouth, and it continues with contractions and churning in the stomach and small intestine. Okay, then you have, oh, and we've talked about this term before. Mastication means chewing. Okay, so you have this muscle in your cheek called your masseter muscle that is going to be responsible for opening and closing. My AirPod finally died. Hold on. I get it to reconnect really quickly. I think we're good. Oh, I guess I'll find out. But so mastication, chewing. Okay. Then we have chemical digestion. Chemical digestion is going to be the second phase of digestion. Chemical digestion is going to use digestive enzymes to further break down food particles into nutrients that the cell can use. Okay. Okay. So next, looking at the mouth. The mouth is also going to be called the oral / the buccal cavity. So if you remember, oral means mouth, right? We talked about it in chapter 1. So if you're taking something orally, you are taking it through your mouth. Okay. Sometimes you will also hear the mouth called the buccal cavity. Does anybody remember where your buccal region is? Your cheeks. Exactly. Right? So your buccal cavity is going to be your cheeks. Or, well, your buccal cavity is your mouth, but the buccal region is your cheeks region. So your mouth is going to be surrounded by, or so it's where digestion begins. Sorry, I put the first fill in the blank a little bit out of order. Okay. It's going to be surrounded by your lips and bordered by your cheeks on either side. Now, inside of the mouth, your palate is going to form the roof of the mouth, and then your tongue and the muscles are going to be found on the floor. All right. And we're going to look at the anatomy of the mouth in a second, but the palate is going to have two divisions to it. So you're going to have your hard palate as well as your soft palate. Now, I'm just going to show you guys this briefly. When I go through this diagram, I like to label it as we go because there's a lot of words on this slide. And then we're going to come back to the slide. But I don't want you guys to think I'm just I don't know, pulling these terms out of nowhere. So, starting with this thing here, okay? This is going to be your tongue. Hopefully everybody knows the tongue, right? Now, underneath your tongue, okay, you have this fold of mucous membrane. That is going to be called your lingual frenulum. The whole point of the lingual frenulum is to anchor the tongue to the floor of your mouth, okay? Now, sometimes in babies, they can be tongue-tied where that lingual frenulum is too short. And it can cause problems with feeding, so drinking milk or stuff because they can't properly suck. All right. Now looking at the roof of the mouth, okay? The roof of the mouth is made up of your palate, but it is divided into your hard palate and your soft palate. And there's a nice cross section when we get to the pharynx that shows like the side view of it really well. But basically, the front part of your mouth is going to be covered with the hard palate, right? So that allows your tongue to like smash food against it. Okay. But when you go to swallow, right, you don't want to have this bony structure in the way. So you have your soft palate, which is muscle, and that is able to move out of the way so that you can swallow that food. All right. Now, you don't want everything to go down your digestive tract, right? So, as Cardi B said, you have that dangly thing at the back of your throat, okay? That is your uvula, okay? Now, your uvula is associated with your gag reflex, okay? So the whole purpose is to keep things out of your digestive tract and therefore also out of your respiratory tract, right? So the uvula is there as like a sensor that tells your body, get it out. So like when babies are learning to eat, right? They have this very sensitive gag reflex because they have been drinking milk their entire lives. And then they get to be like 6 months old and suddenly you're trying to shove solids down their throat. Okay? So they have a very active gag reflex. I just remember like when we started feeding Eloise solid foods, I was so mad because it was like constantly sounded like she was choking. And I was like, TikTok lied to me. Like, I remember I was talking to my stepmom and I was just like, this is insane. I feel like I was lied to. I thought giving babies solid foods was going to be fun, and it is not. It's constantly, it sounds like she's choking. And that is because of the uvula, which is associated with the gag reflex. Okay. So those are like the 5 important structures. Like I said, this graphic has like a lot of words on here. And I think most of them just like describe where the things are. So that's why I like to just go through it that way and then come back to this. Okay. So we just talked about the palates. You have your hard palate towards the front and then the soft palate towards the back. Okay. And we'll see a cross section of that when we get to the pharynx. Then dangling down, you have your uvula. All right. On the floor of the mouth, you have your tongue, which is that skeletal muscle. And then on the bottom of your tongue, you are going to have your lingual frenulum that is going to anchor the tongue to the floor of the mouth. Now, if you remember, right, your tongue has these projections, like the bumps on it, called lingual papillae. And in between the lingual papillae is where you're going to find your taste buds. Okay, but we covered the lingual papillae in chapter 12, so I didn't include it for a second time. Okay, like 10 more seconds. Yeah, so the digestive tract is going to begin in the mouth. Okay. Okay, so next looking at teeth. Now digestion is going to begin when food enters the mouth and is chewed. Again, we're seeing mastication show up again, okay? Chewing is going to allow the food to become moistened with saliva, right? Because you don't want to swallow something that's dry. The example I always use is like that like cinnamon challenge that went viral a while ago where they're like swallowing cinnamon, right? You don't want to like dry out your mouth and then try to swallow food, okay? So the saliva allows you to swallow that food easier. Now, the adult mouth is going to contain 32 permanent teeth. These are going to be designed to cut, tear, and grind food. Okay, I do not expect you guys to know the different types of teeth. So you do not need to know incisors versus canines versus molars and premolars, right? I just want you guys to know there are 32 teeth and like kind of know the tooth structure. All right. And we'll talk about the tooth structure. Okay, so phase of digestion that involves chewing and breakdown of food into smaller components, that is going to be mechanical digestion. Okay, so the key word in this, chewing. Okay, if I said enzymes, we would be talking about chemical digestion. Okay. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. All right, I'm proud of you guys because this question, so what I found out from my other classes today is people are Googling the MCQs throughout class, okay? And if you Google this right now, it's gonna tell you that there are 4 phases of digestion real fast because it goes into like ingestion versus digestion versus nutrient. It's a different phases of digestion than what we talk about, okay? So there are 2 phases of digestion. You have chemical and you have physical, all right? But this is a good place to like note to you guys. Don't Google the MCQs throughout class, okay? Because I would rather you guys get it wrong if you don't know the answer, because that tells me it's something that we need to review, okay? It's an opportunity to quiz yourselves. If you get it wrong in class, it doesn't count against you. So it's better to get it wrong here than it is to get it wrong on the exam, right? So don't Google the MCQs while you're in class, okay? Because if I don't know that something isn't clear, I'm not going to know we need to go through it again. All right, so looking at the structure of teeth. Now, I just have you guys labeling the different parts of the teeth because a lot of these descriptions are just like telling you where the thing is. Okay, so I don't see the point in like writing out all of the stuff personally. So, first thing, the gum line is actually called your gingiva, right? So if you think about gingivitis, right? Gingivitis is inflammation of your gums. Now, the portion of your tooth that is above the gingiva is considered the crown. Okay, so that's like the region. The portion of the tooth that is below the gum line is the root. Right, so those are like regions of the tooth. Now, where the two of them meet, that is called the neck. So right at the gum line where the crown and the root are meeting, okay, that is going to be the neck. Now, talking about the specific pieces to the tooth, okay, you have a hard tissue that is called enamel. That is going to cover the crown. All right. The piece that covers the tooth when you're looking at the root is called cementum. All right. And what it covers is this yellowish tissue called dentin. So when you get a cavity, all right, what you're doing is you're getting a like buildup of like sugars and bacteria that is chewing away at that enamel. Okay. And when you get a filling, you can just fill that enamel in. If it festers and goes on for long enough, right? They might need to do a root canal where they literally drill down and they take out all of this stuff inside. Okay. That is what we call a root canal. However, in your tooth, right, the root canal is actually a piece of something. Okay. So inside of your dentin, you have what's called your pulp cavity. And the pulp cavity is going to be filled with connective tissue, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and that is all called pulp. All right. So what they do in a root canal is they drill down into the pulp cavity and they pull all that stuff out, all the way down to the root canal. Okay. And then they fill it up with artificial cement so that your tooth stops hurting. Now, sometimes if your tooth is like degraded enough, I don't know, we have a really big cavity here. Okay. What they have to do is shave off all of this enamel and put like an artificial crown on. All right. So those are like the caps that you see that are like gold or silver, or I have porcelain ones. So, yeah. So those are the different parts of the tooth. The enamel is the hardest substance in the body, just as a fun fact. You don't have to include it in your packet. Okay, like 10 more seconds. Yeah. So there are 32 permanent teeth in the adult mouth. Yeah, permanent teeth in the adult mouth. Okay. Now looking at salivary glands. Okay. Salivary glands are going to secrete something called saliva. Saliva is a clear fluid that consists mostly of water, but it also has mucus, an enzyme that kills bacteria, antibacterial compounds, electrolytes, and two digestive enzymes that we're going to talk about when we get into chapter 22. Okay. Saliva is then going to transform food into a bolus that can be swallowed easily, which we'll talk about at the end of this section. Okay. So you have three different salivary glands. Okay. You can actually feel them to help you like solidify where they are, I guess. The first one is going to be your parotid gland. Your parotid gland lies just in front of your ear here. Okay. The parotid gland is like what gets infected when you have the mumps virus. So if you've ever seen mumps, it causes these like chipmunk cheeks here. Okay. So you can really obviously see where the parotid glands are if you Google mumps. Now the parotid glands has a parotid duct that's going to drain to like where the top of your molars are. So when you go and get dental work done and they shove those cotton swabs up there, what they're doing is they're blocking that parotid duct. Okay. Next, we have our submandibular gland, which you can feel if you push like right up here. So submandibular under your mandible. Okay. Now your submandibular gland is going to empty onto either side of your lingual frenulum. So if we go all the way back to this image here, okay, you can see these two little bumps at the base of your lingual frenulum. Those are your submandibular salivary ducts. So that is what's going to carry the juices out from the submandibular glands. Lastly, we have these sublingual ducts. So sublingual meaning under the tongue. Okay. The sublingual glands are going to drain into a bunch of different ducts that are located at the base of the tongue. They're not so much they don't have so much like one like tube that goes out. Okay. You can feel your sublingual duct right here. So don't push like too hard. Okay, do so. But now saliva is going to transform food into a bolus, okay? So once you mix the food with saliva, it is now called a food bolus. That food bolus can be swallowed easily, okay? Now, does anybody remember which nervous system is going to stimulate salivation? Which one is your rest and digest nervous system?
Is that the PNS?
Yeah, but it's part of your PNS. So it's going to be your parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. So parasympathetic nervous system, whereas your sympathetic nervous system, that one's going to be your flight or fight one, right? That one is going to inhibit salivation. Like 10 more seconds. Yeah. So the purpose of your salivary glands is to produce saliva. Okay, it's in the name. Salivary glands produce saliva. Okay, let's do like 20 more seconds because there's a lot of people that still haven't answered. So. Yeah. So the teeth, the tongue, the salivary glands, liver, pancreas, gallbladder are all considered to be accessory organs of the digestive system. Okay. So they are not part of that tube itself. Okay. They're the things sitting outside of that tube that are going to secrete things that help out digestion. Now, once we have chewed up our food, we have mixed it with saliva, it is now called a food bolus. Okay. And we want to pass that food bolus down to our throat. Okay? Our throat is our pharynx. So this is the cross section that I really like with talking about like why we have the hard palate versus the soft palate. So our hard palate is going to be made up of bone, right? Once that food bolus has been mixed and everything, okay, we have our soft palate back here. And that soft palate is going to shift backwards as we swallow that food palate, or sorry, that food bolus. Okay. And the food bolus is going to continue on down the pharynx. Now we have this structure here that we're going to talk about when we get to the respiratory system called your epiglottis. Okay. And the epiglottis is just a flap. So it starts upright and then as food passes by it, it snaps shut. Okay. So your epiglottis just prevents food from entering your respiratory tract. And again, we'll talk about it when we get to the respiratory system, but just to give you a little intro. Okay. Now you have 3 divisions of your pharynx that are all named based on where they are. Okay. So that are all based on where they are. So you have your nasopharynx, which is going to be behind your nose. You have your oropharynx, which is behind your mouth. And then you have your laryngopharynx, which is going to be right above your larynx. Okay. Now, food is only going to pass through your oropharynx and your laryngopharynx, right? Because you are eating through your mouth. Okay. So it's coming into your oral cavity and it's going to your laryngopharynx, so that part of your throat. You shouldn't be taking food in through your nose. However, air will pass through all 3 of them. Okay, so air passes through all 3. Okay, for that true false, the larynx is not the same thing as the pharynx. Okay, so for the true false, it is false. Your larynx is basically your voice box. And again, we will talk about it when we get to the respiratory system, but I just want to point it out to you guys that the larynx and the pharynx are 2 different things. They sound similar, but they're different. Okay. Now, once we have gone through the pharynx, so that back part of the throat, okay, it is going to push the food bolus into the esophagus. Now, the esophagus is just one long tube that's going to connect the pharynx to the stomach. Okay, pharynx to the stomach. All right. Now, food doesn't just like fall down, okay? It is actually pushed down through contractions called peristalsis. And the way that I like to explain peristalsis, okay? Esophageal sphincter first. Now, at the bottom of the esophagus, right, you have this thing called your lower esophageal sphincter that is going to prevent backflow of stomach acid into the esophagus. Okay, and we're going to talk about acid reflux in a second here. But basically, the esophagus is going to carry that food bolus all the way down to the stomach. But as we're going to see, right, the stomach has stomach acid, which can damage tissue. So you don't want that stomach acid splashing back into the esophagus. So you have this thing called your lower esophageal sphincter trying to prevent that. Now, gravity does not just carry the food bolus down, okay? We have these things called peristaltic contractions. So peristalsis, all right? And what peristalsis does is it pushes that food down. So think about like toothpaste, right? So if you're one of those people that squeezes the toothpaste tube in the center, right? It's going to smash all that toothpaste down to one end, okay? And then the person that comes in behind you, they have to push the toothpaste out. So what they do is they squeeze the top and then they're going to massage it down towards the tip, right? Same thing with peristalsis, okay? So think about it as squeezing the toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube. All right, so you have that area of contraction on top of the food bolus and it's going to push the food bolus downwards. Now looking at heartburn, okay? Hold on 1 second. Now looking at heartburn, okay? Heartburn is going to happen when that lower esophageal sphincter is not working properly, all right? So when you have heartburn, that acid from your stomach is working its way back into the esophagus and causing inflammation and irritation. Now, the reason why we call it heartburn is because the esophagus is going to sit right behind the heart, right in front of, no, the esophagus is behind the heart, sorry. So the esophagus is going to sit right behind the heart, right? So sometimes when people come into the ER with chest pain, they're going to come in and they're going to be like, oh, I just went to an Indian restaurant that had really spicy biryani and I think it caused me to have a heart attack, okay? Not that chest pain should be like belittled or anything like that, okay? It's just that sometimes it can be misinterpreted, okay? So heartburn can come off as very sharp chest pain. Now, over time, if you keep exposing this end of your esophagus to those stomach acids, what it can cause is something called Barrett's esophagus, which can eventually lead to esophageal cancer. So heartburn should definitely be taken care of. If you're having chronic heartburn, talk to your doctor. Okay. Now, looking at the stomach, okay. Oh, for what type of digestion does the esophagus participate in, right? Now, we have not mentioned any enzymes in the process of the esophagus. It secretes mucus to help push the food down, but that mucus does not have any sort of enzymes whatsoever in it, okay? So the esophagus is only participating in mechanical digestion. All right. So mechanical digestion. So for what digestion does the esophagus participate in? Now, looking at the stomach, right? So we've gone down through the esophagus and we are dropping that food bolus off into the stomach.
The Ferminator.
Check the drawers in the coffee table.
Dinner?
Yeah, can you put it on for me? We're gonna do break in like 20 minutes. So, sorry about that. So the stomach is going to take that food fullest from the esophagus, right? Now, if you remember, right, I don't know why this diagram doesn't have the lower esophageal sphincter here, but you're going to find the lower esophageal sphincter about there. Okay, so we're just going to draw it in because we're responsible adults who want to know everything about the digestive system. So your esophagus comes down, past through the esophagus, lower esophageal sphincter. Now your stomach has different sections to it. All right. This first one is your cardiac region, which makes sense, right? Because it's towards the heart. The next one is going to be your fundus. So if you look at the shape of your stomach, okay, your stomach does this like backtrack thing after it comes in from the esophagus. Okay. That part of the stomach that goes above where the part of the stomach that goes above where the esophagus comes down into, okay, that is going to be your fundus. So that backtrack area. Now, the majority of the stomach is what's called the body. All right. So that's going to be that yellow part. Now you have another sphincter at the base of your stomach called your pyloric sphincter, which is going to control the movement of that stomach production, which we'll talk about in a second, into what's called the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part of your small intestine. Your book starts using the term duodenum without actually defining it. But the duodenum is part of your small intestine. Okay. So the region that is closer to that pyloric sphincter is what's called your pylorus region. Okay. Then you have two curvatures of your stomach. You have your lesser curvature and your greater curvature that are just like naturally occurring. Okay. Now, your stomach is really cool, okay? Because, so throughout your digestive tract, we don't have you guys knowing the different layers of the digestive tract this semester, okay? But just so you know, throughout your digestive tract, you have pretty much the same layers throughout, with each organ having its own modifications. Now, the stomach has a significant modification because in its like muscular layer, it has an extra layer of oblique muscle. So this extra layer of muscle is going to allow your stomach to contract and churn vigorously as it's processing that food. Okay. So it's going to let it do not only this type of contraction and this type of contraction, but it also allows it to twist. Okay. Which no other organs have that like twisting motion. All right. No, I don't remember if I explicitly said, honestly, but I'm going to go back to the last slide to make sure that I highlighted the right things. Okay. So the primary function of the stomach is going to be to, I think I just like skipped over the descriptions and started labeling. So the primary function of the stomach is to store food. Okay. It is also responsible for preparing food for digesting by contracting and churning, to break food into smaller particles, to mix it with gastric juice. Okay. Once this food has been mixed with gastric juice, it is now called chyme. Okay. So food plus saliva equals bolus. Bolus plus gastric juice gives you chyme. Okay. Chyme is going to leave the stomach through that pyloric sphincter that we talked about and enter the duodenum, which is the first part of your small intestine. Okay. Sorry about that. I skipped right over those. Now, getting back to the why I was like, oh wait, I forgot about the primary function. Okay. Primary function of the stomach is to store food, right? When it is not full, your stomach doesn't need to take up that much space. Okay. So it is going to collapse. And when it collapses, it has these folds inside of it. Okay. So it has these folds, and these are called rugae. Okay. The whole point of the rugae is to flatten and allow the stomach to expand. So the way I like to think about the rugae is like those popcorn shirts. They were popular when I was young, and I think they're coming back into style now. Okay. But they like stretch out. They look like little baby shirts, and then you put them on and they're like full size. Okay. It's kind of how I like to describe rugae, right? They stretch out and flatten so that the stomach can expand. Okay, like 10 more seconds. Yeah. So the esophagus is going to connect the pharynx to the stomach. Okay, it's just one long tube. Does peristalsis, brings it down. Now your gastric mucosa, so like the inside of your stomach. Okay, it's going to contain these depressions called gastric pits. So you're going to hear gastric a lot. Gastric just means stomach. Okay, so gastric pits, gastric juice, gastric glands, all are in the stomach, right? So if you're on an exam and it's asking you a question about the small intestine, right? And you see the word gastric in one of the answer choices, you can automatically eliminate that, right? So gastric mucosa contains depressions called gastric pits, okay? At the bottom of these gastric pits, you have what are called gastric glands. These glands are going to secrete the various components of gastric juice. Okay. Now, gastric juice is going to be mainly hydrochloric acid, so HCl and pepsin. We're going to talk about pepsin when we do chapter 22, because chapter 22, we kind of incorporated all of the like digestive enzymes and whatnot. Okay. Hydrochloric acid, we talked about in chapter 2, way back when we did chemistry, right? Hydrochloric acid is super acidic, meaning it has a pH of 0 when it is just hydrochloric acid. Now, gastric juice is not purely hydrochloric acid, okay? So gastric juice has a pH of about 2. You do not want to expose the inside lining to a pH of 2, okay? It will just chew away at it. So your body has this protective mechanism where it's going to secrete mucus to line the stomach and protect it from that acid. I know I have like a big chunk of space after mucus. It got left over from when I was editing the packets down. You don't have to write anything there. Okay. Now you also have these things called enteroendocrine cells, and they are going to secrete 2 different hormones. So the first one you have ghrelin. Okay. Ghrelin is going to increase the appetite. We're going to talk about it in chapter 22 quite a bit. But I want to introduce you guys to it now because it is a pretty important enzyme, or not enzyme, hormone, right? All the other hormones that contribute to appetite are going to suppress it. The only one that increases it is ghrelin. So if you can remember, ghrelin increases appetite. If we're asking you a question about what increases it, the answer is ghrelin. If we're asking you a question about what suppresses it, the answer is not ghrelin, okay? So Now, just talking briefly about the movement of chyme and a couple other things related to the stomach. Okay. Now, like we said, right, once you mix that food bolus with gastric juices, it is now called chyme. The chyme is going to move towards that pyloric sphincter, but this pyloric sphincter will only wants to release a little bit at a time. Okay. In your duodenum, you have pancreatic juice, which is going to have some basic fluids in there to help neutralize that acid. Okay. But you don't want to like overwhelm your duodenum, right? You don't want to just like bum rush it. Okay. So your pyloric sphincter is only going to release about 30 milliliters at a time of that chyme, so that it is slowly getting released into the duodenum, so the duodenum has time to neutralize it before it damages. Okay. Yeah. So that's the whole point of this, is just to explain the pyloric sphincter a little bit more. Gastric secretion phases. You guys aren't going to be tested on this. Okay. We want you guys to know mechanical versus chemical digestion. And I feel like when we include gastric secretion phases, people get a little bit more confused because they start thinking of these phases. Okay. Gastric secretion phases, the only thing that you guys like should take from this, you have like when you smell food, the smelling the food is going to stimulate your stomach to secrete gastric juices. That is going to stimulate another chain of events, so on and so forth. Okay. But don't worry too much about gastric secretion phases, because I don't want you guys to get confused with chemical versus mechanical digestion. Next thing, peptic ulcers. So peptic ulcers can be caused by one of two things. Okay. Now, back in the day, right, I used to think peptic ulcers were caused by like extreme stress. Okay. And like stress can like exacerbate it because of like the different processes that go on in your body. But peptic ulcers are caused by two things. The first one is H. pylori. Now, H. pylori is really cool because the guy that figured out peptic ulcers are caused by H. pylori, so he came up with this like proposal that peptic ulcers were caused by H. pylori. And at this time, everybody was like, you're cuckoo bananas. You don't know what you're talking about, right? This was also like right around the time that they were developing antibiotics. So he was like, I think I can cure peptic ulcers. I think it's caused by H. pylori, and I think antibiotics will treat it. Everyone wrote him off. They were just like, there's no way that's true, right? Now, this guy decided to test his own hypothesis, and he just injected himself with the H. pylori and then treated himself with antibiotics. Okay. And he cured it. So he got some sort of prize. But yeah.
Yeah, H. pylori is the worst thing to have. I had that. I think I was on like 9 different antibiotics to get rid of it.
Jesus. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure. Yeah. It probably tore up your stomach. So not the most comfortable experience. But yeah, so that's one way you can get peptic ulcers. The other one is if you are taking a lot of NSAIDs like aspirin, okay, they can interfere with the production of that mucus. And when you lose that production of the mucus that's protecting your stomach lining, all of that stomach acid can start to chew away at that stomach lining, okay? And that can also cause peptic ulcers. Okay, like 10 more seconds. Yeah. So gastric juice is going to be made in the stomach. Okay. Gastric means stomach. Anytime you see gastric, gastro, stomach. So like gastritis, inflammation of the stomach lining. Okay. 10 more seconds. Yeah. So chyme is going to be a bolus plus gastric juices. Okay. Water plus saliva, or sorry, plus saliva. Saliva plus food gives you the food bolus. Bolus plus gastric juices gives you chyme. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and do break. So let me get a timer up. And I will see you guys in 10 minutes. Oh, sorry about that. I was running a little bit behind. I was finishing putting my dinner together. Okay. So next, looking at the liver. Does anybody know what the medical term for liver is? What's a really common liver disease?
Jaundice.
Jaundice comes from it. So jaundice is a side effect. Get it from like sharing needles.
Hepatitis, right?
Hepatitis. Hepatitis is inflammation of your liver, right? And we know itis means inflammation. Hepa is liver. Or hepato. Okay. So I think the question on there says like, what prefix means liver? What medical term means liver? Okay. Hepato. Now the liver is the body's largest gland. Okay. It has 4 lobes. I do not expect you guys to name all of the lobes. Don't stress about that. Okay. You have 2 lobes that are visible from the front. In between those 2 lobes, you have something called your falciform ligament. Okay. The falciform ligament is going to separate the 2 lobes, and it's also going to anchor the liver to the abdominal wall. So to keep the liver from like floating around everywhere. Okay. Now the liver does a whole bunch of things. It does over 250 tasks. So it stores and releases glucose, processes vitamins and minerals, filters toxins, and recycles old blood cells. However, I forgot to include the most important one. The liver produces bile. So please write this in your packet somewhere. Okay. Okay. Because we're going to talk about the gallbladder versus the liver. And the gallbladder is responsible for storing the bile, but the liver is the thing that is actually producing it. Okay. And this is always a really important concept because bile is really important when it comes to digestion. It enables you to digest fat. So, liver produces bile. Now, looking at your liver, okay, the blood supply to your liver. If you look at the back right, you can see the last 2 lobes, the caudate and the quadrate. But like I said, I'm never going to ask you to identify the lobes. So, now you have 2 important like blood supply to your liver. Okay. The first one is going to be your portal vein. So your portal vein is going to carry oxygen poor but nutrient-rich blood from digestive organs to the liver. So your digestive organs, like your small intestines, right? They're undergoing all of these metabolic processes so that they can take in these nutrients. So as they are doing that, they are consuming that oxygen, but they are also picking up the nutrients. Okay, so once they pick up those nutrients, they have used up the oxygen that's in that blood, and it is going to go to the liver. Now, the liver also has things that it needs to do that requires oxygen. So you have a second blood supply. You have your hepatic artery, which is going to carry that oxygenated blood from the aorta to the liver. Okay, so the hepatic artery is providing that oxygen that the liver needs in order to do its metabolic processes. Okay. Now, looking at the gallbladder, like I said, the liver is going to produce the bile. The gallbladder is going to store and concentrate it. Okay. Now, you do not need to know anything about this biliary tree here. Okay. I forgot to take it out from my slides from last semester. You don't need it. I just left it on for this so that I could point out to you that you don't need it because I know I sent out the slides with it on. So, Now, the whole purpose of the gallbladder is to store and concentrate bile. It is always really easy to identify the gallbladder because the gallbladder is the only organ that is green in your body. Because the bile is going to stain the gallbladder. If you see other green organs, probably not a good thing. Now, the way that this works, okay, the liver is going to produce bile and it is going to release it into your small intestine. All right. If your small intestine does not need that bile at that moment, it is going to back up into your gallbladder, and that gallbladder is going to store it there. Okay. Now, a lot of people have heard of gallstones. Gallstones are little calcifications inside of the gallbladder. And what I mean by calcifications, they're just little hard deposits. If they are just sitting in the gallbladder, it isn't really a problem. Okay? The problem comes up when the gallstones move into the duct system. Because what they can do is they can scrape on the walls of the ducts and they can get stuck in there and cause that bile to accumulate and then get reabsorbed into the skin. Okay? And that will cause jaundice. Okay, like 10 more seconds. Okay. Yeah. So the gallbladder is going to hold the bile after it has been produced. Next, we're going to talk about the pancreas. Now, the pancreas is going to be secreting two really important, so I put enzymes, they're hormones. They're just chemicals, either way, okay? So the pancreas is going to be secreting insulin and glucagon, okay? Now, there's a whole bunch of different types of cells within the pancreas because it serves both endocrine as well as digestive functions, okay? So the two important enzymes that it secretes, insulin and glucagon. Now, the whole point of insulin is to allow glucose to enter cells, all right? So what happens is your body is going to digest these carbohydrates, right? And these carbohydrates are then going to enter, so these sugars are going to enter the bloodstream, okay? Once they get into the bloodstream, in order to be used by the cells, they need to be able to get into the cells, right? Insulin is going to enable them to get into the cells. So when you are taking it out of the bloodstream to put it into the cells, you are lowering that blood sugar, okay? Glucagon is the opposite. Glucagon is when you do not have enough sugar in your blood, so your body starts to release those stores to increase your blood glucose, okay? It is also going to release pancreatic juice, which is just digestive enzymes and an alkaline fluid, okay? Digestive enzymes are going to aid in digestion. The alkaline fluid is going to neutralize that stomach acid, Now, when we talk about diabetes, okay, diabetes is when the body cannot properly produce or use insulin. This is going to lead to elevated blood glucose levels. Now, there are two types of diabetes. You guys watch Love is Blind at all, right? There was one guy that like went on a tirade about like, he was like, there's a guy over here who has like a 5-year-old kid who's got diabetes, and I can't like imagine letting my kid's nutrition be so awful that like my kid would have diabetes at 5 years old. Okay, there are two types of diabetes. You can be born with diabetes where your body doesn't produce insulin, or it can lead you from poor diet, but that's usually like in older adults. Okay, so just as like a side note, okay? You see symptoms like increased thirst, slow healing cuts and sores, fatigue, blurred vision, frequent urination, and unexplained weight loss. And we're going to talk about like diabetes and when it becomes an urgent situation in chapter 22. So for now, just knowing that it's associated with insulin and blood glucose levels is enough. Now, pancreatitis. Pancreatitis is going to be the inflammation of the pancreas, okay? It can happen for a bunch of different reasons, like autoimmune conditions, heavy alcohol abuse, stuff like that, okay? What it ends up doing is downstream causing problems with digestion and malabsorption, okay? Because you're not getting those pancreatic enzymes that you need to help with chemical digestion. So the next section we're going to talk about is the small intestine. Now, the main purpose of the small intestine, chemical digestion and nutrient absorption. Now, with the small intestine and the large intestine, okay? I always make a note of this because I feel like when I first learned, I didn't like put 2 and 2 together really quickly. The small intestine and the large intestine are not named in reference to their length. They are named in reference to their diameter. So the small intestine is much more narrow, but it is much longer than the large intestine. Okay. Now your small intestine has 3 segments to it. You're going to have your duodenum, your jejunum, and your ileum. And I have it all typed out for you guys. Okay. Now your duodenum is going to be the first 10 inches of your small intestine. Okay. It is going to begin at your pyloric valve and it is going to end as the intestine turns downwards. So if you look at the shape of your intestine, so it comes out of the stomach, goes like this, and then it loops back down. Okay, and then it goes into like all the squiggles. Okay, the duodenum is going to end when that loop back down happens. It is going to receive the chyme from the stomach as well as pancreatic juice and bile from that duct system. Okay, and this is going to be where stomach acid is neutralized and pancreatic enzymes begin chemical digestion. Most digestive processes occur here. Okay, I think I have that written next to the definition. Next, we have the jejunum. The jejunum is going to be the next 8 feet. All right. It is going to have a huge surface area, which makes it ideal for nutrient absorption. All right. And we're going to talk about all the modifications that increase the surface area and why they do that in a second here. And then the last 12 feet are something called the ileum. Now, the ileum consists of lymphatic nodules called Peyer's patches. So for what is the purpose of Peyer's patches? They just serve an immune function. Okay, so you can just put like immune system function. You don't really need to know anything beyond that. Okay, so Peyer's patches contribute to immune function. Now, there are 2 types of contractions that are going to occur in your small intestine. Okay. First one is segmentation. Segmentation is ring-like contractions that break up food and mix it with digestive juices. So I always describe it like the Swedish massage, right? Where like you're getting the chopping back and forth. Okay. Because what it's gonna do is like chop up the intestine like this. That's gonna help mix it up with all of the digestive juices, like the pancreatic juice, whatever is left over from the gastric juice, so on and so forth. The next one is going to be peristalsis, and we've already talked about peristalsis. It's the same thing in the intestines as it is in the esophagus. It's going to be that wave-like contraction that's going to move the food down the digestive tract. Okay. Can I type that in chat for you guys, because it seems like that takes a minute for people to write down. So I can give you a second. Have another bite of my dinner. Okay. This is all that stuff written out in more detail if you want to see a little bit more context to it. Okay. Ten more seconds. Yeah, so the ileum is going to be part of the small intestine. Okay. Now looking at your intestinal lining, right? I said you want to have increased surface area to contribute to absorption. The other thing you want to do is slow down the movement. Okay. So the first modification that we have of the intestinal lining that's going to contribute to this nutrient absorption are something called circular folds. Okay. And what the circular folds do is they allow the food to like spin down that small intestine. Okay. So that allows it to go slower as opposed to if it just like, right? So the circular folds are going to cause that time to spin. So it's going to increase that contact time with the mucosa. Now, on top of the circular folds are things called villi. Okay. So on top of the circular folds are things called villi. Finger-like projections. So you can kind of see them here. Okay. Now, the next fill in the blank is also going to be villi. So you can see villi sticking up here as well. Now, inside of those villi, so on both like, oh yeah, the like things down here, right? And so on both of these lines here, so this one as well as this one, okay? The answer to villi is on both of these, okay? I guess it would probably just be better to like pull up the packet. because it seems to be confusing people. So. Yeah. Okay. This is going to be circular folds. On top of the circular folds, you have villi. Okay. Villi are finger-like projections. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, inside of the villi, okay, you have these things called lacteals. The lacteal is going to be comprised of an arteriole, a venule, and a lymph vessel. Okay, so the arteriole is going to be bringing the oxygenated blood so that the cells have oxygen to carry out its metabolic processes. Okay, the venule is going to be picking up the nutrients and carrying those away from the villi. And lastly, you have a lacteal, which is going to be taking in that extra fluid. Or sorry, not extra lacteal, sorry, a lymph vessel, which is going to be picking up extra fluid. The whole point is your jejunum has a lot of modifications to do nutrient absorption. Okay, so it is highly vascularized, meaning it has a lot of vessels, including arterioles, venules, and these lymph vessels organized in what are called fluids. Okay. Now, at the base of the villi, okay, so like the villi are like hills, right? You have these valleys that are called intestinal crypts. The intestinal crypts are going to contain things called goblet cells. And the goblet cells are going to secrete a mucus that is going to help like lubricate the food on its way down, right? Because just like with the swallowing, you don't want dry things passing through your digestive tract, okay? It is also going to be where rapid cellular growth occurs because you have continuous physical damage occurring to these villi, right? You keep constantly hitting them with food. Over time, it's going to cause damage to the cells. So it's not an ideal place for cell growth to occur. All right. So it's going to occur in these intestinal crypts, and it's going to the cellular growth is going to occur in these intestinal crypts, and then the cells are going to move upwards. All right. Now at the very top of these epithelial cells, you have what's called a brush border of, sorry, that's not the fill in the blank, a brush border of microvilli. So if the villi are the finger-like projections, the microvilli are super, super, super tiny finger-like projections. The microvilli are also going to contribute to increasing the absorptive area, and they're going to produce some digestive enzymes. Okay. Now, looking at an analogy, so I don't know if you guys know anything about AI, but like Musk came up with his own like version of ChatGPT, and I was like messing around with it like at the beginning of the year, and it came up with this analogy for absorption in the small intestine that I really like. So yeah, if it helps you, great. If it doesn't, I'm not offended because I didn't write it. Is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so you can think of absorption in the small intestine as like a marsh as opposed to a river. All right, so the goal is to absorb nutrients. With a river, right, you're having it like rush past. It's going super quick. So there's not enough time for the water to like soak into the ground. Okay, it's a high pressure situation, so it's just flowing on past. If you look at like a marsh on the other hand, okay, a marsh is going to be more spread out and it's going to be slower moving. So it gives that water time to sink into the ground. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between, or that's why you want to have all of these things to slow things down and increase the surface area. All right, it gives the nutrients time to soak into the digestive tract. Now, in your small intestine, okay, you have a collection of microbiota. So this microbiota, once again, just like the microbiota on your skin, you don't want this microbiota to get into your body outside of that digestive tract. Okay, so keeping that intestinal, like, what is it called? The integrity of the intestinal wall is really important, okay? Because it's just like with compound fractures or third-degree burns, right? You don't want things to end up in the wrong spot, right? So the whole point of this is you have a microbiome in your small intestine. It can contribute to a bunch of different diseases. They're researching it. Microbiome is a really hot research topic right now. Now looking at your large intestine, okay? We've just passed through the small intestine. The small intestine has done all of our nutrient absorption. So at this point, the large intestine is going to focus on water absorption or water reabsorption. Okay? Now, the large intestine is going to begin in a pouch called the cecum. Okay? So we just came through the ileum of the small intestine, right? And we are moving into the cecum. Now, between the two of these, you have something called your ileocecal valve, okay? And your ileocecal valve is there to help ensure that material is moving in a forward direction only. So it is only moving from the ileum into the cecum. Okay, so it prevents that backflow. Now, at the very end of the cecum, you have this little projection called your appendix, which we talked about way back in chapter 1, right? So if we go back, I don't want to use that. So if we look at our abdominal quadrants, right? Does anybody remember which abdominal quadrant the appendix is found in?
Hey, Laura.
Right lower quadrant. Okay. So your appendix is going to be found in that right lower quadrant. Okay. Now, point where the ileum meets the large intestine, that's going to be your ileocecal valve. Why is it important in terms of direction of material movement? Ensures that material moves only in the forward direction. Now, I think the rest of the colon, so colon means large intestine, by the way. Let me just type that up because I feel like I use them interchangeably. Okay. Colon means large intestine. I feel like it's pretty easy to name the rest of it. Okay. So like we said, right, we want one-way direction of food flow. Okay. So first, the food is going to go from the cecum, and it is going to go up the colon. That section is called your ascending colon. Now, once it has gone up as high as it can, you have this really sharp turn called your right colic flexure. Okay. Does anybody remember what organ is found in your right upper quadrant?
Is it
Liver.
the gallbladder? No, no, it's the liver. It is.
Yeah, it is I mean the gallbladder as well, because the gallbladder is right underneath the liver. But in this case, the liver, right? Because it is also called the hepatic flexure, because it is near the liver. Okay. So once it has done its little sharp turn, it is then going to go across. Okay. And it goes across the transverse colon. We are then going to reach our next flexure, which is called our left flexure, or left colic flexure. Okay. And just like with the right flexure, it's named after the organ that it's located by. So in this case, the spleen. So it can also be called the splenic flexure. The food is then going to go down. And if ascending means up, descending means down. Okay. So it is going to go down the descending colon. Now, we are then going to go to this S-shaped colon. If you like, use your imagination, it's kind of S-shaped. That is called your sigmoid colon. Okay. So the sigmoid colon is that S shape down to the rectum. All right. And your rectum is going to be composed of those last 7 to 8 inches of the intestine. The rectum will then lead down into the anal canal, which makes up that last part. Okay. Now the anal canal is going to be part of the tube. The anus is going to be the opening. All right. Now your anus has two sphincters to it. You are going to have your internal sphincter, which is composed of involuntary smooth muscle, and then you have your external sphincter, which is composed of voluntary skeletal muscle. Okay. So what happens is your anus, so feces get down to your anus, okay? And your internal sphincter, it arrives there, your internal sphincter senses that feces, and it tells your body, we need to poop, okay? So that is when you get the urge. However, you can control where you go to the bathroom, okay? That is thanks to your external sphincter. Your external sphincter is comprised of voluntary skeletal muscle. Okay, so the external sphincter is going to control where you go. Now, on your packet, it says what 2 types of contractions occur in the large intestine. You guys do not need those. Okay, I just forgot to take it out. That's all. And then it asks, what is defecation? Who knows what defecation is?
BM.
Yep, bowel movement. Okay. Now, in the large intestine, chemical digestion is not occurring, right? Because like I said at the beginning, all of the nutrients have already been absorbed. Okay, by the time you get down to the large intestine, you're not concerned with breaking it down any further. Okay, so you do not have any enzymes being produced or anything like that. All right, your large intestine is focusing on water reabsorption. So I have this video that I really like. It's a nice summary of the digestive system. So I'm going to play it for you guys. And I will send the link in chat in case it starts like speaking to you in Spanish or something like that. Sometimes that happens. Okay. So why am I blanking on how to get out? There we go. Like, I don't remember how to get out of here. That's fine. Okay, so next we're going to talk about enteral feeding. Now, this is just basically feeding somebody through a tube. All right. So when you put in a tube, it is because people are unable to meet their nutritional needs due to some other condition through oral intake. Okay. So this can be due to GI disorders, neurological conditions, trauma, severe injury, or surgery. Okay. Now, depending on where it goes into where it goes down to is how it's named. So you can have nasogastric, which goes from the nose to the stomach, right? Because gastric means gastric, or sorry, gastric means stomach. You can have nasoduodenal, so nose to the duodenum, which is that first 10 inches of the small intestine. Or you can have nasojejunal, so from the nose down to the jejunum. Okay, Or you can have orogastric or oral jejunal, just meaning it starts in the mouth. Now, what you do with this tube is you're going to inject a nutrient solution, either continuously or intermittently. So one of those two. Now, with this tube feeding, why would you not put it any further than the jejunum? Like, what does the jejunum do? Why don't you push it further than the jejunum?
It absorbs the nutrients.
Exactly, right? So the jejunum is going to be responsible for absorbing nutrients. Okay? If you put the tube past where the jejunum is, okay, you are bypassing the area that is taking in that nutrient. So you are defeating the purpose of this tube. So that is why the tube does not go past the jejunum. Okay, just to like drive home the point of what the jejunum does. Okay. So we have a couple more MCQs. We're gonna wrap up a little early, just because it's a good, like, it's where I ended with all my other sections. My stomach's a little upset, so. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. Yeah, so your mouth is gonna go, or sorry, your digestive tract is gonna go from your mouth all the way down to your anus. Okay, so your anus is gonna be the bottom opening of your digestive tract. Ten more seconds. Yeah, so a primary function of the GI system, so the gastrointestinal system, is to break down food. Okay, so it's breaking it down. Producing hormones is going to be due to the endocrine system. Regulating blood pressure, there's a bunch of different systems that contribute to that. Filtering blood is going to be like, it's like your cardiovascular system, and it's a couple different things. The main function of the GI system is to break down food. Okay. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. And I have some time set aside tomorrow to get caught up on grading like participation and whatnot. So that should be up to date soon. I did catch up on course project rating. So if you submitted your course project and it still says 0, shoot me an email. I believe I got to everyone though. So, all right. I will see you guys on Monday. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Night.
Night.